Welcome to this episode of Shakespeare's Sonnets on Who was William Shakespeare. I'm Peter Matthews. In the previous two episodes, I revealed the Aramaic and Hebrew sources to the sonnets and explained each of the 16 chapters to the sonnets and the parallel poetry by Bassano from the very same sources. If you haven't watched them, I encourage you to watch these episodes first. In my 2017 book, Genesis of the Shakespearean Works, I showed scholars an overview of the Jewish influence over all of the Shakespearean plays. This is important because of the Jewish sources in the sonnets. All's well that ends well is from the Hebrew expression sof tov, hakol tov, which in English means exactly that. All's well that ends well. Thus, the author of this play was clearly Jewish, but one of the primary sources was the Zohar of Mantua, which printing was supervised by Rabbi Isaac Bassano of the Mantuan synagogue. What about A Midsummer Night's Dream? See, this was taken directly from the ancient Jewish holiday and festival of Tu B'Av, a Carnivali-style midsummer night of love, according to the ancient Jewish rituals, where on the full moon of Tu B'Av, or the 15th of Av, young virgins would borrow white garments and dance in the vineyards upon nightfall to celebrate the beginning of the grape harvest festival. As You Like It comes from the Hebrew word chofesh, a free people to do as you like, or free will. And there's an imagery in there of the forest of Arden. Now, this is interesting because the forest of Jarden, or the Jordan Valley, is where the Jewish general Judah ben Jarius and 3,000 of his troops were hiding. Do you really think it was, with so much imagery, do you really think it was the forest of Arden? You see, this general fell in battle against the Romans. The earliest version of this play was probably penned by Geronimo Bassano in Venice, or should I say Hieronymus de Bassanus in Latin, and it was performed before the Doge before it was banned by the Catholic Church in 1544. This was some 20 years before Shakespeare was born. Now, we are attempting to gain a copy of these banned documents at the moment to be able to verify this, so I'll report back shortly on that. You see, many of the early plays and masques were performed before King Henry VIII on the banks of the River Thames, long before Shakespeare was born. This is why the playwright Robert Greene called Shakespeare a plagiarist, though in this episode I'll show what I think really happened. Every single Shakespearean play had Jewish colourballistic imagery throughout it, and many involved members of the Bassano family. The Merchant of Venice is a story about Battista Bassano and his brother Antonio Bassano, who is the Merchant of Venice, who came at loggerheads with the London merchants. You see, he owned many of the grants where other merchants couldn't gain access to these things. And that's why it was so much controversy over it. Their merchant business went on for 4 generations. But nobody knows the underlying story of the Merchant of Venice is actually a 13th century Venetian story about a woman named Bianca Rubia and her husband Battista Bassano during the capture of Bassano da Grappa by Ezzelino II da Romano. This story was otherwise out of print unless it was known to the family. I could delve into each of the plays, but we don't have time. I will mention The Tempest, which frankly has the finest Jewish Kabbalistic imageries in it, and it uses the Tetragrammaton to create Caliban the Golem. Then we have Prospero desiring to know how to use Kabbalah. The Hebrew word emet, meaning truth, is carved into the Golem's forehead, and a 443-letter Hebrew invocation brings it into life, which I obviously will not share on this channel for obvious reasons. Who was the one who originally recorded how to do this? That's right, it was Judah Hanasi. Now, what was the name of Giacomo and Antonio Bassano's wives? They married the two Nasi princesses. Many scholars have not realized that the Shakespearean works were deliberately embellished with Jewish Kabbalistic pidgeotum, or embellished poetry used as poetic song in worship on Shabbat and other festivals. They were braided with Jewish Essene theology and Jewish Kabbalistic teaching from the Sefer HaZohar and the Sefer Yeritza that were otherwise inaccessible to anyone but Jewish masters of Kabbalah, mostly rabbinic families. William Shakespeare was not a Jew or an Essene or a master Kabbalist. He certainly could not read classical Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, ancient and medieval Greek, nor the ancient Emilian dialect or Old Mantuan from northern Italy, where many of the Bassano family come from. You see, all of these were required to read and translate many of the texts, let alone infuse these texts within all of the Shakespearean plays. There are dozens of Jewish sources penned in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek within the Shakespearean works. I'll give you a few examples. The Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, Sefer Yeritza, or the Book of Formation, the Babylonian Talmud, the Midrash Tanhuma, Sefer Raziel Hamalak, or Book of Angel Raziel, Targum Ecclesiastes, or the earliest rabbinic commentary on Ecclesiastes, the Zohar of Mantua, 1557 to 1558, in 3 volumes. The Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of the Fathers, Sefer Chassidim, Book of the Pious, Sefer HaBehir, Book of Illumination, and the Sefer HaYasha, or the Book of Jasher. We must not forget the vast amount of imageries containing much of the Jewish Essene teaching contained in the Dead Sea Scrolls, such as the Book of Jubilees that was otherwise out of circulation in the 16th century, which is very interesting indeed. Another favourite of the dramatists was the Romano-Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, particularly his works on antiquities and the War of the Jews. William Shakespeare was not a Jewish master Kabbalist. He was not a rabbi. Therefore, he couldn't have penned these graphic Aramaic and Hebrew infused plays. As we discussed in the previous episode, the 2 primary sources to the sonnets were the Aramaic and Hebrew 1558 to 60 Zohar of Mantua, which was the printing was supervised by Rabbi Isaac Bassano of the Mantuan Synagogue. The second was the Thessalonica 1597 Zohar Adash, or New Zohar, which was also written in Aramaic with Hebrew references. In essence, the Zohar is an Aramaic commentary of the Torah with a prophetic edge for the return of the Messiah in the days of the woman, which we are now in. Having forensically examined many thousands of documents on the Bassano family, I expected to find at least a few thousand on William Shakespeare, but this is not the case. Today I want to run through just a few documents. I don't have the time to lay everything out. that we know for certain. Then I'll reveal the parallel poetry to the sonnets from the very same source documents, revealing who William Shakespeare really was. One of the earliest entries recorded his father Johannes Shakespeare in 1552 as a tanner and glove maker in Henley Street, Stratford, where William was born, dumping his noxious waste in the street, and was fined 1 shilling by the manorial court, which is equivalent to, say, the magistrates' court today. Then in 1556, as a glove maker, he was sued by Thomas Such of Armscote for a debt of £8, which is quite a lot of money in those days. By October 1556, John Shakespeare's life took a turn by marrying Mary Arden. He also became an ale conner. Interesting word, isn't it? An ale conner. Maybe con artist was a better word, but in this case it referred to a position to ensure the weights and measures of beer, bread, hops and grain were sold at a fair price, to which he personally was twice convicted in 1570 and 1571 for usury, where the law of England described the illegal money-lending practice since the reign of King Edward VI as a vice, most odorous, detestable, and declared contrary to the word of God. Someone said to me recently, this is a Jewish practice. Yes, it was in England prior to 1290 AD, and was the major reason why they were expelled from England. But John Shakespeare was certainly not Jewish. And pretty much everyone in England knew all about that. So I don't agree with that argument. Essentially, the man who was protecting the price of grain hoarded and sold grain at exorbitant prices to hungry locals during a famine right across Europe because of extreme weather conditions. William followed in his father's footsteps. He was prosecuted in 1598 for tax evasion and price gouging or extortion, specifically by hoarding grain over a 15-year period and selling it at exorbitant prices to hungry locals, similar to what his father did. This is who the Shakespeare family were. Common criminals who took advantage of local families during a dearth or famine. It is no wonder he had a lot of informers who targeted him for coin to Queen Elizabeth I. If you don't believe me, look up the legal documents for yourself. Where did William Shakespeare learn these skills? Well, I think we know the answer. As we know, John Shakespeare was elected as an ale conner in 1556, and within 12 months he was fined 8p for dereliction of his duty on 3 occasions. By 1558, John Shakespeare was appointed as a town constable. It's a bit like Hot Fuzz with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, except Shakespeare's father was one of 4 constables for the greater good. In 1561, John Shakespeare and John Taylor were appointed as chamberlains, in this case equivalent to overseeing the accounting of the shire. What a lucrative position for a con artist or money lender, illegal wool seller, price gouger and tax evader, owing a whopping £132 to the Crown. Like I said, they were common criminals, which ancillary evidence reveals them as dangerous thugs, where many people feared for their lives. William Shakespeare, as we know him today, was born Guilelmus Filius Johannes Shakespeare in April 1564, which is Germanic for William, son of John Shakespeare. There was no E or A in the spelling of Shakespeare. He was likely born a few days before his baptism in the Holy Trinity Church on Wednesday, the 26th of April, 1564. The plague broke out soon afterwards in July 1564. Now, this is the home where William Shakespeare was born. 2 years after William's birth, John Page brought a charge of detenue, or the wrongful detention of another person's goods, against Richard Hathaway, John Shakespeare's father-in-law. He sought £8, and John Shakespeare was guarantor. The lawsuit soon disappeared. Whether settled or thuggery, we do not know. The following year, John Shakespeare was elected as one of 14 aldermen of Stratford-upon-Avon in 1565, during a time where they struggled to find representatives for council. John Shakespeare was elected mayor in September 1571, around the time William attended this school, the King's New School, which was later renamed the Grammar School of King Edward VI at Stratford-upon-Avon, which obviously moved into the Gildham Hall circa 3 years earlier. Traditionally, they went up until the age of 5 to some sort of prep school and a dame school for the girls to get them ready for grammar school. There are no records of William Shakespeare finishing grammar school. Therefore, most scholars tend to assume he left it around 13 years of age to help his father in his business, which at the time had numerous litigation issues. Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway, who had a striking resemblance to Anne Whately, which scholars have concocted a false doctrine of ghosts, and the first of Shakespeare's Dark Ladies for the Sonnets. I've proven the sources to the Dark Lady Sonnets, and it represents the Shulamite Queen of King Solomon, which is an expression of the daughters of Jerusalem. Therefore, what we have been taught is completely flawed. Now let us examine the portrait of Susanna Shakespeare, because that will help us. As you can see here, Susanna Shakespeare, who does look like both the portrait and sketch of her mother. Clearly, Shakespeare and Hathaway had wanted to get married because Hathaway was already 6 months pregnant with Susanna. The documents after the marriage and birth of their children are scant, to say the least. The Shakespeare family were first introduced to theatre with the Queen's Men visiting Stratford in the Guildhall of 1569, previously known as the King's Men. As I noted in my earlier book, Shakespeare Exhumed, the Bassano Chronicles, the Bassano family were part of many of the original playing companies, such as the King's Men, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and also played in the Lord Howard's Men, who later became the Admiral's Men, Lord Strange's Men, and Leicester's Men. The Lord Chamberlain, Henry Carey, the first Baron of Hunsdon, is the lord who Emilia Bassano served as mistress in the royal court. William Shakespeare later became an actor in the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Now, before you get hot under the collar and misinterpret the meaning, a mistress in that period was a woman who held the position of head of a household, in charge of a school, in charge of servants, or a female scholar. It is Middle English from the Old French maestresse and maestre or master, meaning the female equivalent of a master in their field of expertise. Emilia Bassano was a principal of a leading school for nobility. She actually owned the school, which explains her position rather well.
She was no prostitute, as some inept scholars have suggested. They simply did not understand late Middle English and the great vowel shift to early modern Middle English. Yeah, even I struggle these days. William clearly followed in his father's footsteps by hoarding grain, corn, wool, hops, and other products, waiting until the time was right to sell when prices were high. One could argue that he was a shrewd investor, but some of his activities were highly illegal. My well-versed English father-in-law, who came from the Cotswolds, called Shakespeare a con artist, a fixer, even an extortionist, just like those who pushed the billion-dollar tourist industry in his name. See, the legal documents do confirm what my father-in-law suggested. I'm reminded of Act 1, Scene 2 of The Tempest, where Ariel, or should I say the Archangel Ariel in the creation story, who's a muse of fire, says, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." Even in his early years, Shakespeare would go and poach rabbits and deer from Charlecote Park and was often whipped. After coming of age, Shakespeare continued his poaching on Sir Thomas Lucy's land and was sentenced to jail. For those looking for the lost years, look no further than London prison records. Then we have the 1596 Langley Writ, recorded in the Court of the King's Bench on the 29th of October 1596, which I can't show you for copyright reasons. And again on the 24th of January 1597, which alleges Shakespeare and others made death threats to William Waite, whose mother happens to be Frances Lucy, a relative of Sir Thomas Lucy. There's been all sorts of conjectures by scholars throughout the centuries, but the motive is clear. Lucy had Shakespeare flogged and jailed for illegal poaching of deer, so Shakespeare and his mates went after Lucy's family. There are few documents on William Shakespeare until we find him as an actor in London in the 1590s. Let me begin with the early 1594 quarto edition of a pleasant, conceited history called The Taming of a Shrew. It was sundry times acted by the Right Honourable the Earl of Pembroke, his servants, commonly called The Taming of a Shrew. For those who don't know, Henry Herbert was the second Earl of Pembroke and his wife Mary Sidney, who is part of Emilia Bassano's dedication in Salve Deus Rex Judæorum, or Hail God, King of the Jews. This is the cover of the 1594 first quarto edition of The Taming of a Shrew, which does not bear the name of William Shakespeare. The play was entered into the stationer's registers as A Shrew on the 2nd of May 1594, no doubt penned during 1593 during the closure of the theatre district because of the bubonic plague, or Black Death as it was called. It does, however, connect to the Bassano family. On the cover we find these Latin words around here. Now, this is from the Latin Vulgate, and I won't bother trying to read it in Latin. It's basically a curse against the opponents of Israel, translated as make their path dark and slippery with the angel of Yud-He-Vav-He pursuing them. Now, the angel or the spirit of Yud-He-Vav-He is Shekinah. So this is the image in the top section here of Shekinah with the open book of Torah. It also refers to the early 13th century Portuguese song of the same name from the Abbey of St. Bartholomew in Arousa, Portugal. Then we have the later edition of 1596 and 1607, which doesn't bear his name either. And this is the 1596 edition. It has exactly the same imagery on here. Now, have scholars simply missed this early play, or did they conceal it intentionally? Somebody asked me, how can you ask that, Peter? Well, I do ask that because the characters in this play are Emilia Bassano, Alfonso Lanier, her sister Angela Bassano as Kate, who happens to be Angela's mother was Catherine, or Kate as she was called, and her suitor was Joseph Holland, the antiquarian, although they changed his name because of his powerful family. And, of course, William Shakespeare as Sly Drunken. Now, before you get upset, William Shakespeare's father worked as a beer taster. It was part of their lives. William's mother, real-life brother-in-law, was named Thomas Sly of Lapworth. And William Sly eventually became an actor with Shakespeare or at least by 1603. There is a play inside a play with Shakespeare depicted as a drunken tinker who was conned into thinking he was a lord by this tapster or barman. Now, this character of the tapster is very important because it connects to Willobie His Avisa and Shakespeare that I mentioned briefly in the previous episode. The scene opens with the tapster calling Shakespeare a drunken slave, trying to wake Shakespeare lying in the gutter, and the Lord enters after the tapster throws Sly out the door. And the Lord's servant says, "My Lord, 'tis nothing but a drunken tinker." I think I've got the prepared over here, and here it is here. And he says his head is too heavy for his body. Who is it that fits this bill, that his head is too big for his body? Well, we all know that's an imagery of William Shakespeare. They put the Lord's clothes on him. He wakes up in the Lord's bed, where the Lord, the servant boy, and the Bassano family of musicians are playing sweet music with a shoulder of mutton, a little vinegar, to make our devil roar here. Very interesting. And then we find the Lord saying, "Very well, Sirrah, see that they want nothing." Sirrah is a Hebrew word for an ancient cistern or wellspring that doesn't stop flowing from Psalm 42, with the roar of waves directly from the Aramaic and Hebrew Zohar of Mantua. It's talking about the waves of creation, the waves that are right through, happening everywhere right now. So why is this play so important, you might be asking yourself? The tapster is cited as a host in the later 1623 First Folio edition after the tapster's death. Neither the 1594, the 1596, or the 1607 bear the name of William Shakespeare as a playwright. In fact, he is not mentioned at all. In the First Folio, Shakespeare is noted as What does it say? The names of the principal actors in all these plays. So William Shakespeare, Richard Burbage, John Hemmings, and it goes on all the way through. Now, and you can even see William Sly down there. And of course, this was printed a number of years after William Shakespeare was dead, 7 from memory. Now, he is not noted as a playwright. If he did write it, then I believe he plagiarized this play. Robert Greene called Shakespeare a plagiarist by publishing plays that were performed on London streets much earlier. This is just one example. The tapster said to Shakespeare at the end of the play, "I marry, but you had best get home. Get you home, for your wife will curry you for dreaming here tonight." And Shakespeare went home to with the tapster instead of going home with his wife. Now, this is the first suggestion of Shakespeare's bisexuality. So now I'd like to mention what Ben Jonson wrote about William Shakespeare. This is Ben Jonson's work, which was published after his death, and it's called Timber or Discoveries Made Upon Men and Matter. Yeah, it's 4 years after his death, or 25 years after the death of William Shakespeare. And the title, De Shakespeare Nostra, or It is Our Shakespeare. Augustus in Hat, it's basically a reference from Seneca the Elder, Book 4, where he says, "I remember the players have often mentioned it as an honour to Shakespeare that in his writings," and I've underlined that on purpose, "whatsoever he penned," which he brings into question his authorship because he says he never blotted out a line. Now, in editing even this video, I wrote a basic script, and I tell you what, I must have had more than 1,000 mistakes that I had to fix. That's just normal. And he says, "My answer hath been, would he have blotted out 1,000? Which they thought a malevolent speech. I had not told posterity but for their ignorance, who chose that circumstance to commend their friend, by wherein he most faulted. And to justify my own candour, for I love the man, and do his memory and do honour his memory on the side of idolatry as much as any. He was indeed honest, and of open and free nature, had an excellent fantasy, brave notions, and gentle expressions, wherein he flowed with the facility that sometimes it is necessary he should be stopped." And then he uses a Latin phrase, and I don't even think I'm going to try and pronounce that today. It comes from Augustus, who said of Aterius, or to put it crudely, he should have his cake hole stuffed with paper mache so he should stop speaking. Or basically, "Oh, put a sock in it," has the same meaning. His wit was his own power. Would the rule of it had been so too. Many times he fell into those things, could not escape laughter, as when he said, the person of Caesar, one speaking to him, "Caesar, thou dost me wrong." He replied, "Caesar never did wrong, but with just cause." and such like, which were ridiculous. But he redeemed his vices with his virtues. There was never, ever more in him to be praised than to be pardoned. So there we are. Well, basically, Ben Jonson questioned whether Shakespeare wrote the plays, and he often had to stop Shakespeare from putting his foot in his mouth. But scholars don't talk about these issues on authorship. And this was by Shakespeare's good friend and poet in his own right. Now, I want to move on to a wonderful topic that you've all been waiting for, and that is Willobie His Avisa. Willobie His Avisa is a poetic work on the evil-disposed men of several dispositions and the chastity of women, derived from the very same Zoharic sources of Salve Deus Rex Judæorum and the Sonnets, with some citations from John Florio's 1591 collection of Italian proverbs titled Garden of Recreation, to throw Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, off the scent, because he could have prevented it from being published. You see, Emilia tells the reader that she used the library of Henry Willobie, who was born in 1570 and died in 1593, who most scholars presume had died soon after graduating from Exeter College, Oxford, on the 28th of February 1594, though his death record shows that he was buried on the 25th of February 1593 at St. Botolph's, Aldgate, London. For the other Henry Willobie that they cite, of Wiltshire, who died in 1596, previously recognised the poet, was only 2 years of age upon death. Henry Willobie cannot be the poet, having died prematurely in 1593, though he was the perfect cover to publish Emilia's scathing true story. In the Aldgate record, it shows Henry Willobie of 25th of February 1593, who was working as a tapster, a barman, lying in Ego, or living alone at the former home of Samuel Powell, a broker dwelling at the sign of King David. Henry Willobie had no surviving wife, just as the poet revealed in the Taming of a Shrew. So in Willobie His Avisa, as the story goes, Emilia as Avisa, which I'll come to in a minute, was beset upon by a myriad of competing suitors, all of which she rejected because of her deep faith in God. Juno, who she called a filthy beast that came to give her wealth and great riches, and old Helicon, the patron of England's Helicon, Henrico Willoughbygo, not Henry Willobie. It's referring to Henry Carey, the real patron of the Lord Chamberlain's men, who in the work is associated with William Shakespeare. Emilia named Carey a old devil that lived in a castle, dropping the play name Love's Labour's Lost, friend of W.S. William Shakespeare, that turned from comedy to tragedy, where another could play his part better than himself, linking to what Ben Jonson had said. You see, Carey offered secret gifts in line with the notes of Simon Forman. In Canto 1, we find Emilia tells of how these suitors tried for 10 years. Wanton love hath had a fall. 10 years have tried this constant dame, until her sire, the mayor of the town. For the mayor of London at that time was Sir William Rowe, who died on the 23rd of October 1593, the very same month Willobie His Avisa is dated. Is this a coincidence? I very much doubt it. The nature of the relationship between Henry Carey and William Shakespeare is revealed in Canto 44, and it's very interesting, where we find Carey had a secret disease of the prostate, assisted by Shakespeare. The secrecy of his disease unto his familiar friend, or intimate friend, W.S., who not long before had tried the courtesy of like passion, again alluding to Shakespeare's bisexuality. But Shakespeare blamed Emilia for the disease, where he asked Carey, "Tell what she is that which thee so, I swear it shall no farther go." Soon after the story, W.S. talked with H.W., which I assume is Henry Willersley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, who violently assaulted her after the recommendation from W.S. to use all forms of persuasion. Rather sick. "I think in time she may be won," he says. Absolutely disgusting. Interestingly, in Hebrew Gematria, the surname Writhersley emulates the potential for wickedness, a son of incest. Very interesting indeed. And what about Shakespeare? The name Shakespeare represents one who had two paths, where he could have been a tree in the temple of the Lord. But the surname also means obstinate, cunning, wanting. Instead, he chose to mutter, slander, walk the great highway of foul adulteries. In other words, the sullied, from Sonnets 17 and 53. So, would William Shakespeare really write the sonnets in this tone about himself? I don't believe Shakespeare had any clue what the sonnets really meant. Had scholars connected "There did the rose and lily lie, that bravely decked our smiling face," and the rose, the imagery of the rose is a rose of Israel. If they'd understood this, they would have realized Emilia wrote both works. Now to Avisa. The Spanish name Avisa is translated to Hebrew to warn. In the same way, she warns us of the need for purity to enter the world to come in the Sonnets and in Salve Deus Rex Judæorum. Emilia wrote in the same language and tone in all 3 volumes, desiring to protect the chastity of women so that all women are not sullied by evil-disposed men. In Willobie His Avisa, Emilia told her real-life story over the tale of Isabella, or Avisa in Spanish, Countess of Gloucester, wife of King John, with another wonderful Zoharic layer, just as the sonnets. Emilia explains her truth in the Latin phrase. I won't even bother. I'll just for the name Avisa, that she translates as a loving wife that never violated her faith, is always to be beloved, not wanting to give away the Hebrew and Aramaic origins. It's found in Sonnet 53, and it means a loving wife, the unsullied, that never violated her faith, is always to be beloved, thereby proving the two works were penned by the same author, connecting Salve and the Zohar. Emilia opens with, "A virtuous woman is the crown of her husband, but she maketh him ashamed, is a corruption of his bones," which is Proverbs 12:4, referring to the sullied maidens who have no share in the world to come unless they repent and make every effort to be found spotless. She signed off the first passage of the poetry in Willobie His Avisa with Abel Emet, which is a transliteration of the Hebrew meaning seal of truth as an utterance from God. And this is discussed in Sonnets 7 and 10. Yet scholars still claim it might have been penned by George Gascony. It's simply not possible. Emilia dedicated Salve Deus to Lady Catherine Willoughby, Countess of Suffolk, and her daughter, Lady Susan Bertie, Countess Dowager of Kent, who took Emilia in and schooled her after her father died. Yet most scholars have missed the connection between the two works, because she writes, "Like blackish swan, a woman chaste, if she be young and fair." See, this is talking about the Dark Lady, Adonai, and also the dark ladies known as dark and not dark, or the Sadducees, the righteous women, that's discussed in Sonnet 127. In Willobie His Avisa, the poet noted the rape of Britain Lucretia, or the English Susanna, because both women are mentioned in Emilia's Salve as well. "'Twas beauty made chaste Lucrece lose her life." And she cited the unjust judges by innocency of chaste Susanna. Emilia revealed how she was beaten by H.W. by smarting her face in a fierce assault after she rejected him. It tells a story of what really happened to Emilia. For those scholars who don't understand the meaning of chaste, the Oxford Language Dictionary defines it as abstaining from extramarital or from all sexual intercourse. Now, how in the world can anyone deem that promiscuous? It's quite frankly offensive. Emilia admitted that she spent 20 years telling noble men with vile thoughts, "Hands off, my lord, I'll never yield, I'd rather die," before she married Alfonso Lania on the 18th of October 1592. So at the time she wrote Willobie His Avisa, she was married. Now in Canto 18, and when I mention the canto, I'm talking about canto within Willobie His Avisa, Emilia discussed the sinful ways of men, this Sodom sink, to jest at God. Now, this is coded words as well, like much of the Shakespearean sonnets. Before you draw the wrong conclusions, it's an imagery of Egypt, where Israel descended into evil so that the Lord could bring judgment on those around them. Thus, in Emilia's case, bring judgment on those who raped and violently bashed her. In the final canto, Emilia sourced the same work from her description of Cookham, which is taken from the Zoharic work of Rav Metivta, or head of the academy. It's a prophetic work on the companions in the Garden of Eden as she ushers in the rising of the moon, or Adonai from the dust, and the resurrection of the dead, the great dark lady rising from the dust. Emilia drew also from Ovid's Metamorphoses with the final line, Grand amore, grand dolore, in opum mi copia feci, or in English, grand love, grand pain, he made an abundance of forces. Now, if there's any Jewish Kabbalists out there, you know exactly what I mean. It's alluding to the strange shadows or demons in Sonnet 53. To conclude with her final words, the resolution of the chaste and constant wife that minds to continue faithful unto her husband. This is a lesson for everyone in the world today. Emilia wrote this for the women to educate all of you, but also for the men, because you won't enter the kingdom of God when you die if you do these things. You must have a pure life, or at least repent for the sins that you've done. It's that simple. So thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel, and there's so many more to come. I'll explain each sonnet and what they really mean. Thank you. Bless you.